Good evening and welcome to our personal growth chaburah every Wednesday night at 8:30 to 9:30. These chaburahs are going to be recorded on my YouTube channel, Yisrael Roll YouTube channel. Tonight we begin an expanded version of our personal growth chaburah. I'd like to thank and welcome all of Neshei Aguda, Neshei women of the Aguda Baltimore, for hosting and sponsoring this weekly Wednesday night event. I want to thank Mrs. Chavi Berenbaum very much for inviting me to speak for Neshei Baltimore. And Neshei has agreed to sponsor this event every Wednesday night from 8:30 to 9:30. And as it is the tradition of the minhag of Neshei Baltimore to begin every shir with a kapitel tehillim, followed by a hi ratzon for the refuah shlema of people who are needing a recovery. So I'm going to say a kapitel tehillim. Please say it with me to yourselves in the tehillim of Kuf Lamed, kapitel 130, Kuf Lamed. You can take out a tehillim, say it along with me, and then afterwards I'm going to say a hi ratzon and mishberach for those who are ill. When I pause, please enter a name of someone for whom you are davening, and then I'll continue with the end of the tefillah for refuah shlema. So Kuf Lamed Tehillim, and while you are getting it Tehillim, I want to invite everyone to please get a Chumash Breshis, because this is going to be an interactive shir, and I want you to look inside the text and to grapple with and wrestle with and look at the text, understand the text, so that we want to understand the psukim of the Torah and how they relate to us personally. That's a personal growth chaburah. So in Tehillim, Kuf Lamed, let's say it together. Shir Hamalos. Mimamakim krasicha Adonai, Adonai shima bekoli, tiena oznecha kashuvos, lekol tachanunai, im avonos tishmaryo, Adonai mi ya'amod, ki mecha haslicha, lema'an tivarei. Kivisi Adonai kivsa nafshi b'dvarav hochalati nafshi l'Adonai mishomrim laboker shomerim laboker Yechel Yisrael el Adonai kim Adonai achesed v'arbeim ufedus hu yivdes Yisrael mikol avonosav. Sheberach Avosenu Avram and Yitzhak Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, David, Shlomo, Yevarech v'Yirape Yasacholim,
Dov ben Leah,
Ba'avur she Hakala Kadosha, Yispalu Ba'adam, Ba'avuram, Yischarzak Rosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Aleihem, Lachlimam Lerapoisam Ulachazikam Ulachayoisam, Yishlachem Mehira Refuah Shlema Min Hashamayim, L'chol Avireihem, L'chol Gideihem, B'soch Sha'ar Chol Yisrael, Hashta Ba'agal V'zban Kariv, Noimar Amen. I'd like to ask everyone to please open your Chumash Breshis in chapter 19, Pasuk 17, Perek Yud Tes, Pasuk Yud Zayin. Perek Yud Tes, Pasuk Yud Zayin, chapter 19, Pasuk 17. The Torah tells us when Lot was leaving, escaping from Sdom because of the destruction of Sdom and Amorah, the Torah tells us that there was a command by Hashem not to look back. And what happened? the wife of Lot, looked back at Sdom as they were escaping. I'm looking for the exact pasuk. And the pasuk says in Yud Zayin, "Vayi chotziam oisam hachutza, v'yomer himalet al nafshecha." Be protective of your life. Al tabet acharecha. Do not look back. Val tamod bechol hakikar. Do not stand still. Hahara himalet. Escape to the mountains. Penti safeh. Lest you be obliterated. Then we turn to the pasuk where they were actually escaping. And what happened? It says on chapter 19, pasuk 25, Vayahafoch es ha'arim, chapter 19, verse 25, Vayahafoch es ha'arim, Hashem overturned the cities, ha'el, these cities, V'eskol ha'kikar, let's call Yoshvei ha'arim, the tzamach ha'adama, V'tabet ishto me'acharav, and his wife looked back behind him. She did not look Sdom. She looked back over the shoulder of Lot. Looked over the shoulder of Lot to look at the Sdom and Amorah being destroyed. Vatihi nitziv melach, and she became a pillar of salt. Rashi, take a look at Rashi. What does Rashi say? Vatihi nitziv melach. She sinned with salt, and so she was stricken with salt. Mida keneged mida, measure for measure. What does that mean? Measure for measure. She sinned with salt, says the Medrash, and therefore she was stricken with salt. Mida keneged mida. Says Rashi, Amar la, Lot said to her, Tnimat malach la'orchim halalu, the angels who left Avraham Avinu went to Lot to save Lot from Sdom. And when they came, Lot wanted to give them some food, as he learned in the tradition, the minig of Avraham Avinu, hachnasas orchim. He wanted to give them a meal, hachnasas orchim, but she did not want to do so. She was a member of Sdom. Lot was from a different mentality, from Avram's mentality. He wanted to give them a meal. And he said, please give a bit of salt to the guests. Tanimat melach la'orchim alalu. Amra loy, she said back to him, Afa minak hara hazeh ataba lahanig b'makom hazeh. This bad custom too of giving salt to guests to make them comfortable. This minhag also you want to bring, this bad minhag, this bad custom you want to bring into practice in this place in Sdom? What is the meaning of this? So if we take a look at the chat, I posted a video of my trip to Israel this past summer. And on the chat, I went to the Pillar of Salt. I went to Sdom, to the area of Sdom by Yam HaMelech, with my good friend and tour guide, Daniel Zelig. And if anyone wants to go to Eretz Yisrael after COVID and wants to have a exciting, inspiring experience of walking the land of Israel with a Tanakh in hand, with a Torah in hand, a passionate Torah-dik Ben Torah tour guide is my good friend Daniel Zelig. And he gave me a tour. We traveled the country, and I put up 36 videos of different places we went to in Israel. You can find them on my YouTube channel, Yisrael Roll YouTube, under Encounter Israel. And one of them I posted on the chat right now, and you can listen to it now. You can listen to it afterwards. You can watch it. You play it for 1 second, you will see the actual traditional idea or the concept that people say. It is said in the area that that rock that looks like a human being is the pillar of salt of Lot. We call it Lot's wife. And in fact, there are these brown signs, archaeological signs, pointing and saying, Lot's wife, this way. So Lot's wife is there. And it's acknowledged by the Israeli government and the Archaeological Antiquities Authority that this is a traditional place, a minig, that's known as Lot's wife. And she's there. She stands, it's a very big boulder. It looks like a person with a head and shoulders. You can take a look at it. And it's not just a story, it's a minig, we consider it to be Lot's wife. We can't be sure. And what was Lot's wife doing? What was the issue of Lot's wife? What was wrong with her doing this, looking back? So the Torah says that she was guilty of not being a machnias oireach. She wasn't being kind to guests, and therefore she turned into a pillar of salt. That's one Rashi. Another Rashi tells us that the reason is because Hashem said to her, you were involved in that life in Sdom of being achzari, of being cold-hearted, of being not accepting of people, not kind to people. So therefore, when you're being saved in the merit of Lot and Avraham Avinu, not through your merit, you have no right to look at somebody else's misfortune. You cannot gawk at someone else's misfortune. So I have a particular pet peeve called gawking. My road rage, I have a sense of road rage, and I want to share with you how I experience road rage. I have road rage when I'm on a traffic, driving on the 695, and there is an accident on the other side of the highway. And the people on my side of the highway slow down to look at the accident. What happens? People slow down. There's a backup of traffic by about a mile or 2 miles because they're slowing down to look over their shoulder. It's called rubbernecking. So this gawking is called rubbernecking. And we're rubbernecking. My neck is rubber. I'm looking over my shoulder as I'm driving, looking at the misfortune of the people over there. There's no reason for traffic to slow down on my side of the highway. On the other side, people are coming up and they're stuck because a lane is blocked, so they can't go forward. I understand that. Not so much, but I understand it because they can drive by. But soon as you get to the point of the accident, on the other side, you come to the point where opposite me, there is the accident. The traffic on my side zooms, goes forward. I get so upset. I'm so upset and get so enraged, road rage. I have road rage at the other people who are stopping. And I make it a point not to look at the accidents over there, because if I'm going to look, I better stop. If I want to look at someone else's misfortune and I want to see what happened, I better stop. I can't simply be like Lot's wife and gawk at somebody else's misfortune and not do anything about it. That's being a gawker. That's being a bystander. That's being a passive al tamod al dam rayecha. Do not stand by while someone else is dying or hurting. And that gets me very, very upset and very angry. I wrote about this in my book, one of my books called When the Going Gets Tough. I wrote a book, one of my 10 books that I was zocher to write, and one of them is called When the Going Gets Tough, How to Deal with Life's Challenges. You can find it on Amazon.com. And in the book, I wrote about road rage, and I wrote about this idea. And I wrote about this about 25 years ago. That book came out about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I was living in London, England. And as I was writing that paragraph about road rage, when people stop and look at someone else's misfortune, and I have road rage when that happens, I left my office, the Seed office in London, in Edgware, got in my car, and I drove home about 7 minutes to get home. As I was going home, there was traffic. And there was a gentleman right in front of me, a car in front of me, one car length ahead of me, who they saw a man running across the road in front of him. He hit him. and I saw the man fly 12 feet. You know, we hear stories about people who are traveling 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, and a person flies 40 feet. I never believed it. How can you fly 40 feet? It's impossible. Not possible. 40 feet. You can fly 5 feet, 3 feet, 7 feet, push, fall down. But I saw the person, a small bump. It was going 10 miles an hour. Small bump. The man flew 12 feet. Fell down on the ground in front of me. Just after I had written, at about 6 o'clock at night, after hours, I was writing a part of my book. I said to myself, I better be careful what I say. Because when I said that I'm angry at road rage and people should not be gawkers, Hashem heard what I was saying. Not that God listens to me. I hope he does. But at that moment, when I wrote that so vehemently, so passionately, Hashem listened. And he said, Yisrael roll, put your money where your mouth is. You're now witnessing an accident right in front of you. Are you going to gawk or are you going to stop? I said, if I am worth anything in my life, to be a man of my word, I have to stop. There was nowhere to park. It was traffic on both sides, 3 lanes on the Edgware Road going up to in Edgware. I went to the side of the road and parked on the sidewalk, got out, took off my coat, it was February, and rolled up my coat and put it under the man's head. He was bleeding. It was just after the beginning of AIDS. And I said, I'm not taking my coat back. I can help the guy out, but I ain't taking that coat back. It was bleeding on my coat. I said, for fallen, no coat. I'm not taking that coat back. The person who hit him was standing with a friend on the side of the road and said, hey man, smoke, because the cop will not smell your breath because you've been drinking, and that's why you hit this guy. You weren't paying attention. Smoke quickly. So they'll cover your breath so the breathalyzer will not pick up the smell of alcohol in your breath. That's what his friend said to the driver who had hit this guy. I waited until the ambulance services came, about 2-3 minutes later. I left my coat there and went home. Hashem was testing me. I wrote, I don't like road rage. And God says, yeah, let's see what you got, roll. Let's see what you got. So this is the idea of what the message here on personal growth that we can learn. One message here is that we cannot be bystanders. See something, do something. You see on the roads, it says, see something, say something. My message for us in our chaburah tonight is see something, do something. Don't just stand there. You see something mistaken, see something in trouble, go and help them. Don't be a gawker, don't be a bystander, but do something about it. Now let's go into our chaburah tonight. And the following unbelievable idea from my Rebbe, Rav Moshe Shapira Zatzal. Says the following. The Medrash in Breshis Rabbah Mem Aleph 41 says the following. Matzasi David Avdi, I found my servant David. Hechan Mitzasi, where did I find him? Sdom. Where did I find him? In Sdom. It's a pasuk in Tehillim, chapter 89, verse 20. Says, Matzasi David Avdi, I have found my servant David, King David. The Medrash explains, and Hechan Mitzad, where did I find him? Hashem says, I found him Sdom, in Sdom. How is that possible? What does it mean that Hashem found King David in Sdom? Sounds incredible. The world is a world of contrasts. Abraham is a world, his world is a world of chesed, and Sdom's world is a world of din, of justice, strict justice. Why? Because Abraham and Sodom based their belief in God and lived the way they believed in God. Abraham Avinu saw God as Hametiv. God is a giver. He contemplated the universe and said, wow, this universe cannot happen by itself. It must be a good God, a loving God who wants to give of himself to give this world to us. And therefore, I want to emulate God and therefore I'm going to do chesed. He brought the midah of chesed to the world because he saw Hashem as a Baal chesed. That's why Hashem started the world with Avraham Avinu. That derech eretz kadma l'Torah, that good deeds, that good behavior, midos tovos, come before Torah, that the Torah is predicated on good deeds. The Sefer Bereshis is called Sefer HaYashar, the book of those who are upright, who are righteous. And that counts a whole book of Sefer Bereshis before Shmos, before we got the Torah on Har Sinai, a whole book later in Parshas Yisro. So since Avraham Avinu saw God as a giver, he also emulated God to become a giver. Sdom believed God as a God of din, justice. Since God is independent and self-sufficient and self-reliant, they felt that they also had to emulate God by also being self-sufficient, and therefore they were not allowed to do chesed. They weren't foolish people. They were thinking people who decided, well, God is independent. He is self-reliant. He doesn't rely on anybody. He doesn't get anything from anybody. He gives, he's a giver. And therefore, since on that aspect of God's independence, we also must be independent. And therefore, chesed is not allowed. It's usur. It's usur. It's not allowed. It's prohibited to do kindness. What is the result of this? Whose view of the world prevailed? The Gemara in Sanhedrin, on page 109a, says the following. The people of Sdom have no place in the Olam Haba. The people of Sdom have no place in the world to come. Why? Let's look at Bereshis, chapter 18, verse 20. Let's look in the Parsha and see what was the bad deed, the evil deeds of Sdom that caused them to lose the world to come. Chapter 18, Perek Yud Ches, Pasuk Chaf. The Torah says, Hashem looked down at Sdom and Amorah. Vayomer Hashem za'akas Sodom v'Amorah ki rabba. V'chatasom ki chavda me'od. Hashem said, because the outcry of Sdom and Gomorrah has become Rabbah, great, and because their sin has been very grave. What is Rabbah? The Medrash says the following. The word Rabbah, great, has the same letters as the word Reba, which means jam. Strawberry jam, blueberry jam. Reba means jam. There was an incident, says the Medrash, where the people of Sdom saw a young girl hide a piece of bread in a jug and give it to a poor person. This was against the law of Sdom because they felt nobody can be reliant on anybody else to live in this world. They have to act like God. God's independent. Hashem is independent, self-sufficient, self-reliant. Every individual must earn their place in the world, not through kindness and chesed, but only through din and justice. And therefore, this girl is guilty of the death penalty. They took this girl, smeared her body in jam, placed her on a roof, and she was killed by a swarm of bees. So not only did Sodom say that this is our view of the world, that we have to be passive and not kind, but they took it as a proactive level one step further and said, and if somebody does do chesed, we have to kill them. It is an affront to God to go against God's will to be kind. When the angels came to visit Lot, how did the neighbors know that a visitor came? When someone comes to your house, the neighbors don't know necessarily that Visitors came, unless you see the car outside, but there were no cars then. They walked up, they came to Lot's house. How did all the neighbors converge on their house? How did they know that visitors came? There wasn't no trumpets there declaring that visitors came to Sdom. So the Medrash says in Bereshit Rabbah 51:5, Lot's wife went to borrow salt because Lot said, let's give them a meal. And let's, as I mentioned before in Rashi, let's give them a meal. And let's bring some salt. So whether she had salt in the house or not, it's not clear. But she went next door to the neighbor and said, can we have some salt? Why do you need salt? Yes, we have guests. Guests? We're not allowed to have guests in Sdom. That's against the law. And they converged. And they converged on the house of Lot and attacked Lot's house. And the angels brought them inside the house. And from there, they escaped out of Lot as it was being destroyed. So she wanted to let the people know that guests came, and she wanted to bring this attack of the people of Sdom against Lot, because she was opposed to Lot's chesed, because she was steeped in the idea of the independence and the din and the justice of what Sdom was all about. This bad habit of giving salt to neighbors, you also want to bring here, she said to Lot. And that's why they converged. And that's why Mida Keneged Mida. What kind of people are these? What kind of people are these? They take a young woman, a young girl, and they smear her with jam, and they let her die at the hand of bees, a swarm of bees. They're not allowed to give salt to anybody. This was the thinking of Sdom. How could they be so evil and continue having children and living and celebrating and eating and still smear somebody with jam and let them die on the roof? A young girl. Anybody. The Midah of Sdom. We know the idea called the Midas Sdom. The Midah of Sdom was that the correct approach to life is din. Since God is independent, man must emulate God. And they believe that man must stand on his own 2 feet without assistance. And they were steadfast in refusing to accept any assistance. That was the law of the land in Sdom, the law of din. And it became a capital offense to do chesed to anybody. A person has to make it on their own. You have to be a self-made man. And any kindness is contrary to the will of Hashem. That was the Midah of Sdom. Any kindness is against the will of God. God is independent, and man must be like God, and therefore man must also be independent and not accept any favors, any kindness to anybody else. This is how they perceived God runs the world, and therefore they acted that way. If you ride a bike, teach your child how to ride a bike. They fall off. You teach them to get back on the bike. Got to keep going. That's a story of teaching a child to be independent, to be a person who can get from place to place on a bike. And when something happens, you act with chesed, and you help them up, take a Band-Aid, and you wash off their knee, and you say, get back on the bike. And they say, no, I don't want to get back on the bike. Get back on the bike. We're forcing them to be independent, but that's independence with chesed. I want them to get on the bike to learn how to become independent. And when a child goes to camp, we want our children to go to camp. We want them to learn how to be away from home and learn how to handle life without mommy and daddy's apron strings, to prepare them. We want them to go away to Beis Yaakov convention. We want them to go out of town. We want them to go to people's houses for Shabbos. Why? We foster independence. But this is not the same thing. This is independence with wrath. Independence with a passion that we're not allowed to perceive any chesed. It was a proactive law. In contrast, Avram Avinu saw the world as a place of chesed. As Tehillim says, King David says, Olam chesed yibane, the world is based on chesed. The Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzato, says, Ki michok hatov lehitiv. It's a law that the good does good. It's a law of God that the goodness of Hashem does good. Which means that Hashem, as a giver, his nature, kiviyachol, is to give. And therefore, he created the world as an act of giving, an act of chesed. He wanted to give human beings who are finite an opportunity to connect with the infinite. So at an act of chesed on God's part, he didn't have to create the world. He's perfect in its own right. But as an act of chesed, a kindness on the part of Hashem, he created the world because he is a chok michok, ki michok hatov lehetiv. It's a law of the giving of God to give. So by his nature, God created the world. Avram, therefore, began to believe in Hashem because of that chesed. And therefore, he emulated Hashem's actions. Hashem was a giver, a Baal Chesed, the source of all chesed. And therefore, since I came to realize that God created the world out of chesed, I too must emulate God and act with chesed. That's why Avraham Avinu brought chesed to the world. That's why his tent was open on four sides. And that's why you and I do chesed. That's why there are gemachim all over the world, a Gemilas Chasadim fund. And people give out arbis for a bris. And they give rides to people in the ride gemach. And they give out tablecloths. They then give out baby chairs and cots. We're Balei Chesed because Avraham Avinu began to believe in God as a Baal Chesed. That's why we do Chesed. Because Avraham Avinu recognized Hashem is a Baal Chesed, and therefore we emulate Hashem, and then we do Chesed because that's how God acts. When we do an act of Chesed, we are acting like God. Mahal hu rachum af ata heyerachum. The Gemara in Shabbos, Kuflam and Gimel on the base says, page 133b, says, Zekeli v'anvehu, this is my God, and I will glorify him. Anvehu, glorify, anve, neve, nave, to beautify God. How do you beautify God? The Gemara says, the word anvehu, Rashi says, anvehu is made up of two words, ani vehu. Anvehu, ani vehu. I and God. How do you glorify God? By acting like God. An unbelievable concept. The way to glorify and beautify God, the anvehu zakili v'anvehu, is to act like Hashem. Says the Gemara, Mahu rachum af ata heyerachum. As God is merciful, you act with mercy. Af mahu chanun, as he is empathic, af ata heyechanun. You must act with empathy. An example. Let's look at Breshis, chapter 21. Turn to Breshis, chapter 21. Pasuk 33, 21 verse 33. How did Avraham Avinu act with chesed? A clear pasuk. Chapter 21 verse 33 says, Vayita Eshel biver shava, Vayikra Sham b'shem Hashem kel olam. And Abraham planted an Eshel in Beersheba, and there he proclaimed the name of Hashem, God of the universe. As the Gemara says, Rashi brings it, that Rav and Shmuel disagree. What is an Eshel? Aleph Shin Lamed. What is an Eshel? Rav says it was a pardes who planted an orchard and gave fruit to the people from the orchard. Shmuel says Pundak was an inn, and he had people stay in the inn. And after they ate at the inn, he said to them, let's bench. They said, what's bench? He said, well, thank God for the food. Who's God? The one who gave us this food. Well, what are you talking about? And through that chesed, he taught people about the chesed of Hashem. He introduced people to God through the chesed acts that he did, and therefore that emulated the acts of chesed of Hashem. So Avraham Avinu's emunah was chesed. Says Rav Moshe, my Rebbe, the Torah of Avraham Avinu was the Torah of chesed. His chesed was the Torah. His chesed was his emunah. He believed in God because of the chesed of Hashem. And therefore he acted that way. So who's right? Is Avraham Avinu right? Or is Sdom right? Is the world based on chesed or is the world based on din? When Hashem destroyed Sdom, that's when the Gemara says, Vayakam Hashem mikisei hadin v'avar lekisei racham. The moment of destroying Sdom was God's decision to say, this is wrong. The midah of Sdom, of din, of self-sufficiency, of not being kind, not being chesedic, not being caring because you have to be self-sufficient is wrong. I must destroy this concept. The people who hold this way are not mean people. They're just wrong. They're wrong because they don't understand God. They don't understand what God is and what the purpose of the world is. This must be destroyed. And therefore, the moment Hashem destroyed Sodom, says Rav Moshe, is the moment Hashem got off the Kisei Hadin and went to the Kisei Rachamim. The Kisei Rachamim, the throne of Rachamim, is the throne of Avraham Avinu. He left the throne, the concept, what a throne means. What does a throne of Hashem means? It means the Hashgacha Pratis. The throne of God that reaches down into the heaven, into the earth, where the footstool of God is in the earth. The throne of Hashem means that the legs of the chair, the legs of the chair of Hashem, the throne of Hashem, reach into the world. The throne of God means Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence. The throne of Hashem means that he left the throne of Din and he got onto the throne of Midas HaRachamim, the measure attribute of Rachamim, which was the way in which he runs the world and is the way in which he runs the world today. Hashem said something more. Not only must evil be destroyed, not this evil view of the world must be destroyed, but it must be transformed into good. I must transform this bad concept, this negative concept, this wrong concept into good. How did he do it? From Sdom, he had to bring out from Sodom King David. Heichan nitzati, where did I find David? Bisdom. In Sdom, I have to extract from the negativity of Sdom, the wrong concept of Sdom, extract from there King David. How so? How did he do that? How would Hashem transform the evil of Sdom into good? By finding King David in Sdom. On the night that they left Sdom, they were saved from Sdom, and Lot's wife was turned to a pillar of salt. All that was left was burning 5 cities from a distance, Sdom, Amorah, and the cities, Gafis, Famelach, sulfur and salt, destroying these areas. And Lot and his 2 daughters. His 2 daughters felt the whole world had been destroyed. They said, who's going to be left to populate the world? Let us have intimacy with our Father, and let's bear children to continue populating the world. It was not an evil act of incest. It was a desire to populate the world. It was a good desire. It was a wrong act. It was before the Torah, so it was not. It was Asur. But they felt, even for Bnei Noach, it was Asur. Gilui Arayos is Asur. But they felt their intention was good. They felt the whole world was destroyed. They were the only ones left. Who's going to continue this world? So they had a good intention. They wanted to bring children into this world. So they were with their father. And the proof that there was good intention was they were not ashamed to call the Bechira, the eldest one, was not ashamed to call the first child Moav. Moav is Me'av, from my father. Isn't that an embarrassing thing to say? I'll call him Moav. Let me call him Stephen. Let me call him William, Harry. Call him Me'av? To announce to the world that I got this child from my father? That's brazen. The answer is it was good intentions. They were not seeing it as an incestuous thing. They said, there's no one left. Therefore, we must be with our Father to bring children into the world. They were not ashamed. They wanted to do it with proper, hopeful intentions to continue to populate the world. From there, from Moav, Moav was the king of Moav, was the father of Ruth. And Ruth was the great-grandmother of King David. From Lot's relationship with his daughter, the eldest daughter, came Moav, and from Moav came the lineage of the kings of Moav, and then King Eglon, Melech Eglon, and from Eglon came Ruth, and Ruth was the great-grandmother of King David. That's the meaning of that King David was found in Sdom. In that act of, which is called chesed, that act is called the chesed act of Lot and his daughters. And intimacy is called chesed. Improper intimacy is a distortion of chesed. But that act was an act of chesed. It was an incorrect act, a distorted act, but it was in good intention. And from that negativity, from that distorted act, came Moav, and from Moav came Ruth, and from Ruth came David. That's the meaning that King David was found in Sdom. To transform that negativity into the acts of chesed of King David is a transformation of evil into good. So how does a person transform from the din of Sdom to the chesed of King David? How do you transform yourself? This is what happened. This is what happened. Sdom, the people of Sdom, were brazenly single-minded and stubbornly insisting on that God is independent and we must be independent. They were stubborn and they held on to that view so much so that it made it into a proactive act of murder of anyone who acted against that law. That was stubborn akshanus. It was an act of single-mindedness, brazenness, achzarius, and it was wrong. Lot was a judge in Sdom. Lot and his daughters, being together with his daughters, they elevated the acts of Sdom in themselves, the brazen stubbornness, and they became single-mindedly desirous of continuing the world. They elevated the act, the brazen acts of din, of Sdom, stubbornness, to see the world this way and not to do chesed. They were adamantly strong about not doing chesed, so much so that they became murderers. The next generation, Lot's daughters, came along and said, we are stubborn also, but for good. We're stubborn to bring goodness into the world. So they elevated the acts of stubbornness of Sdom to a higher level of stubbornness. It was not a good thing. It was not emes, not right to bring Moav into the world. But their desire was, they were single-mindedly desirous of bringing the world to population, Lashevas Yitzara, to bring people into the world. So to take the brazenness and single-minded stubbornness of Sdom and refining it to the next level of the daughters of Lot was to become single-mindedly stubborn to do something good, not something bad, to populate the world. Then, a next level, King Eglon, the king of Sdom, when Ehud came to him,
All right, Rabbi Roll, we can't hear you. You're muted.
So the brazenness of Sdom. The brazenness of Sdom was refined by the daughters of Lot to be stubbornly single-minded, to do something good. The great-great-grandchildren of Moav, King Eglon, he stood up for Ehud. And then the daughter of Eglon, Ruth, she elevated that stubbornness even further. What did she do? What did Ruth do? And Ruth said, Vatomer Ruth, Ruth chapter 1, verse 16, it says, Vatomer Ruth, al tifki ibi la'azvech, entreat me not to leave you, lashuv me'acharayich, to leave you and to return away from you. Ki el asher telchi eleich, where you go, I will go. Uba asher talini alin, where you sleep, I sleep. Amech ameh, your nation is my nation. Elokayich Elokai, your God is my God. The daughter of Eglon, Ruth, became brazenly, single-mindedly desirous to serve Hashem. Imagine that. You have the daughters of, you have Lot, who is brazenly stubborn to be part of the system of Lot and Lot's wife, to be evil to the extent of stubbornness, brazenness, to kill people who did chesed. Comes along with their daughters, and they say, no, I'm going to be stubborn to do chesed. Comes along Eglon, the king of Moav, and says, I'm going to be stubborn to stand up for God. And then someone who acted upon that was Ruth. And Ruth married Boaz. And the word Boaz means Boaz. Within him is strength. And she became the great-grandmother of King David, whose lineage will produce the Mashiach, who will arrive from the same root of brazenness. Can you imagine that? King David comes from Sdom. King David comes from the root of Sdom, of brazenness, but a refined brazenness. And it refines it into a level of single-mindedness to do good, to bring the world to recognize Hashem. The attribute of brazenness was meant to be part of the Jewish people, but not in the form of Sdom. It had to be transformed from Sdom to the daughters of Lot, to King Eglon, to Ruth, into King David. That's what it means that King David was found in Sdom. He was founded in Sdom. The brazenness of King David to fight for Hashem, to fight against Goliath, to withstand the attacks of Avshalom, his son, and all the mutinies and all the plishtim. That strength was a strength to fight for Hashem. And that is the transformation of brazenness into stubbornness for chesed. The question we have to ask ourselves now is, how can we live that? Are we transforming ourselves into growing people? Are we really growing? Are we transforming ourselves from brazenness to chesed? Are we really changing? Can we really say that on Yom Kippur we said we're going to be better, going to change, al chait? Are we holding by that now? Have we learned anything from COVID? We're forced to leave our regular lives and go home to our husbands, our wives, our families, and work at home and live at home and spend 24/7 at home, so to speak. Have we learned to do chesed? Have we learned to be like King David? Have we transformed our own personal brazenness, our gawking nature, our saying, nothing to do with me. I'll watch their misfortune. Or are we transforming ourselves? And when we say, I want to become better, I want to grow, in our personal growth chaburah, we have to ask ourselves this question based on what we learned here in Sdom and the transformation from Sdom and Lot and his daughters and King Eglon and Ruth and King David. That's a process of self-transformation, of brazenness to chesed, of din to chesed, of leaving the kisei, the throne of din, and going to the throne of chesed. Are we leaving our own throne of din and going to the throne of chesed? Are we being less judgmental of our husband or wife, less judgmental of our children? Are we using less body language by saying, "Oy"? Are we using less of that? Less negativity? Less put downs? Are we being more chesedic to those? We're supposed to be in COVID. We're supposed to be sent home now. Hashem's not angry with us in COVID. He just wants something different. He wants change. He wants transformation. He wants the brazenness of Sdom, self-sufficiency, self-made man, to be a Baal Chesed. Are we doing that? Are we giving lip service to this idea? Are we kidding ourselves by saying, yeah, I'm transforming? That's what we have to ask ourselves based on this development of Sdom to King David. King David was found in Sdom. The brazenness was transformed into goodness. Are we doing that for ourselves? Let me share with you an idea. Adam Harishon, when he was asked, did you eat from the tree? His first reaction was, Ha'isha asher nasata imadi, hi nasata li va'ochal. The woman that you gave me, she gave to me of the tree and I ate. Here's the question. The first act of man to answer God, did you eat from the tree, was to blame somebody else. She did it. That's brazen. That's brazenness. That's chutzpah. To take the wife you gave me as a ches, as a helpmeet, Ezer Kenegdo, and to blame God for giving me a helpmate, an Ezer Kenegdo, what kafui toiv. That's a kafui toiv that perhaps we have in ourselves. Comes along the next generation. God says to Cain, I haven't seen Hevel lately. Have you seen him around? So Cain says, Hashomer achi anochi. Am I my brother's keeper? So here we have a better development, a transformation of man to Cain. Cain didn't blame Adam for killing Hevel. He didn't blame Chava. He just didn't take responsibility. He said, am I my brother's keeper? So we see Adam blamed somebody else, but the next generation, Cain, transformed himself. He said, I'm not responsible. I don't know where he is. So the second generation transformed itself and made itself better. Not very good to kill Hevel, but it was better than blaming somebody else. Comes along 10 generations later, 9 generations later comes Noach, and God says, I'm going to destroy Sodom. I'm going to destroy the world because of their corruption. I want you to build an ark. Did Noach go out and do chesed projects? Did he do Shabbatons? Did he do kiruv projects? Did he do shiurim and say, guys, come on, do tshuva? He did not do that. What he did was, he did acts of building a teva for himself and his family. Finally, we have somebody, Noach, who took responsibility, didn't blame somebody else, didn't say, I'm not responsible. He was responsible for himself. For himself, his wife, his 3 sons, his 3 daughters-in-law. And he did chesed in the teva for the animals, but not for anybody else. He did not do kiruv and try to rectify the generation. He saw something, but he didn't do anything. 120 years he built the teva and didn't do acts of kiruv. 10 generations later comes Avram Avinu, and Hashem says to Avram, Sdom, not a good place. They take little girls, and they smear them with honey. And they put them on roofs and have bees swarm on them and kill them and sting them to death. Not a good place. That's the great Rabbah, the great outcry. The Zaka Rabbah is the Zaka Riba. What did Avraham Avinu do? God, if there are 50 tzaddikim, would you spare the people for that? Yes. 45? Yes. 40, 30, 20, 10. Avram Avinu only knew 4 people in Sdom. Lot, his wife, 2 daughters, sons-in-law. 6 people. Lot and his wife, 2 daughters, 2 sons-in-law. He knew 6 people. He was asking for 50. He didn't know them. But he pleaded for people he didn't know. Here is somebody who changed the world, that transformed the idea of blaming somebody else into taking responsibility for the world. That's the story of Adam to Cain to Noach to Avraham Avinu, the Baal Chesed. He transformed himself because he realized that God is a Baal Chesed, therefore I must be a Baal Chesed. And I must act if I see that God is asking me, what do you think I'm going to do? Why did God ask him? Right? The text of the Torah says, "Hamechaseh ani me Abraham asher ani oiseh." Am I going to withhold from Abraham what I'm about to do? Why does the text say that? Why didn't he just say, I'm going to destroy Sdom? The text says that because the Torah says that because Hashem wanted us to know that I want to hear from you. He's giving us in that line, that's the message of tefillah. That one line, should I withhold from Avraham Avinu what I'm about to do with Sdom? No, I'm going to tell him. Why tell him? Because he wants to hear from us. He wants to hear from Avraham Avinu. He wants to hear his tefillah. 50, 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. The first plea bargain in history. Acting for people he didn't even know. Not only his family, 6 people, but 50 people in Sdom. 50 tzaddikim want to save the whole country. Sdom and Amorah for those 50. That's the full development and transformation of mankind. Adam said, blame Chava. Cain said, I'm not responsible. Am I my brother's keeper? Noach said, I'm responsible just for me. Avraham Avinu was the full development of mankind to say, this is what I want. I want someone to stand up and say, I'm going to take responsibility for the world. Av Hamon Goyim, the God, the Avram, the father of the nations of the world. The nations of the world live by chesed. Therefore, we have to emulate Avraham Avinu. We have to emulate the transformation process that happened by King David in Sdom. And the great-great-great-grandson of Avraham Avinu is David HaMelech. Avraham Avinu transformed the blaming of Adam and the non-responsibility of Cain and the responsibility only for himself and Noach into being responsible for the world. And David HaMelech, through the brazenness of Sdom and the acts of transformation of the daughters of Lot, and King Eglon, who stood up for Ehud, and Ruth, who stood up and said, I am not leaving you, Naomi. I'm going to be part of the... Her brazenness was for good. Her brazenness was Shem Shamayim. So what Hashem wants from us is to transform ourselves. The story of Sdom to King David is to transform ourselves. The story of Adam to Avraham Avinu is to transform ourselves. And therefore, we need a plan. When we said, I'm going to transform myself, and we have yet to actualize that in the past 4 weeks since Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, it's because we don't have a plan. I want to propose the following for our chaburah, a personal growth chaburah, and ask you the following. I'd like everyone to please write down, right now, one thing that you want to work on this week. One thing you want to work on, and I want you to write out a step-by-step strategy, 3 steps of how you're going to achieve that transformation. For example, the Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh says if a person is angry and they want to stop being angry, the first week they have to stop throwing plates at their spouse. 1 week, a moratorium on throwing plates. I'm not throwing shoes, plates, rolling pins, glasses, shoes, throwing nothing at my spouse or the person who I get angry with. After I master self-control by not throwing things at my spouse or the person or the kids, whatever, then I have to stop cursing. 1 week of not cursing, okay? I can still raise my voice, I can still get angry, but I can't throw things and I can't curse. The 3rd week, I have to take the decibel level down from 10 to 5. Instead of screaming at 10, I have to scream at 5. And the fourth week, I have to talk on level 1. There are 3 levels of speech. Level 1 is, hi, how are you? The level of kindness, chesed, how are you doing? Kinderlach, my dear husband, my wife, how's everything? How's your day? That's level 1 speech. Level 2 is, how was your day? Can you please pass the broccoli? Please pass the asparagus. What are we doing for Shabbos? That's level 2 speech. Level 3 speech is, why are you making a mess of my kitchen? So we have to work on ourselves. Whatever you choose to work on in our personal growth chaburah, we need a transformation plan, a strategy. I'm going to work on this 1 week. The first 3 days of this coming week, I'm going to start doing X. And then I'm going to do Y for the next 2 days and Y. And then by next Wednesday night, 8:30, I hope and pray that will have integrated the message of transformation of Sdom and to King David and Adam Harishon into Avram Avinu and become a transforming, better person, a growing person. And we are not kidding ourselves. But we will not kid ourselves if we have a plan, a strategy of self-development. So, Mi'at Hashem, which we zoche to continue growing in a real way, in a practical way, in a self-transformative way, Mi'at Hashem, to follow the Sefer HaYashar, the book of Reshis, and in that way, God willing, our avos and imahos, in that way become better Avdei Hashem, servants of Hashem. I hope to see you next week, Wednesday night, the same Zoom channel, and you're invited to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Yisrael Roll YouTube. Please visit the chat where I put up the Encounter Israel video of Lot's wife, and you could please join us next Wednesday night. Tell your friends to join us next Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. I want to thank Nishay of Nishay Aguda of Baltimore for sponsoring tonight and this entire program every Wednesday night. It's open to men and women on Zoom, and hope that you can invite your friends to hear. It's going to be recorded later tonight. It'll be on record on the Yisrael Roll YouTube channel as under the category of the playlist called Personal Growth Chaburah. So have a good night and good preparations for Shabbos. I hope to see you next Wednesday night at 8:30. Thank you and Laila Tov. Good night.